Let me tell you something. There are moments in life when you're pushed so far that the only thing left is to push back. And when my HOA decided, without permission, without a deed, without even a conversation, to build 35 homes on my land, well, that's the moment I realized they had no idea who they were messing with. Because I didn't raise my voice. I didn't go to war in court. I didn't even call the county. No. I simply walked up to the old service gate at the reservoir I built with my own hands, grabbed the rusted steel wheel, and turned. I never planned to own a reservoir. The truth is, I inherited it, along with the 42 acres around it, from my grandfather. He was one of those old-school types who believed in quiet living, big land, and keeping paperwork meticulous. He kept every deed, every survey, every receipt for every fence post he ever hammered into the ground. Land is the only thing they're not making more of, he used to say. After he passed, I became the caretaker of that land and the old dam he built in the 60s. It wasn't some massive engineering marvel. It was a simple private reservoir, fed by a natural spring with a spillway, a reinforced dam wall, and a steel release gate. Granddad used it for irrigation, fishing, and peace. I used it the same way. For 10 years, life was quiet, peaceful, simple. Until the HOA came. Now, let me clarify, this wasn't an HOA I signed up for. They had formed around a new subdivision built near my property, not on it. They governed their neighborhood, their streets, their shared amenities. None of it involved me. Or so I thought. At first, it was the small stuff. Their board president, a man named Greg, came by to politely request that I keep my grass below 3 inches near the boundary line for the aesthetic continuity of the community. I told him, this is a farm property. My grass will be however tall my grass wants to be. He didn't like that. After that came the letters, first monthly, then weekly, claiming my barn was an unapproved structure visible from their walking trail. Then the fines for unregulated water usage. I ignored all of it, of course. Not my HOA, not my problem. But HOAs, they don't like to be ignored. It happened on a warm Tuesday morning. I woke up, brewed my coffee, walked outside, and heard something strange. Hammering. Drilling. Voices. A lot of voices. My property is quiet. You can hear a deer blink from 50 feet away. But that morning, it sounded like a construction zone. I followed the noise. With every step, the hammering got louder, the talking clearer. And then I saw it. A foundation. Then another. Then another. Concrete slabs, framing, trucks, survey markers, construction crews, a whole operation on my land. 35 homes planned. Based on the layout, 10 already underway. At first, I thought I must be mistaken. Maybe the crews were slightly over the line. Maybe they were working on the edge of HOA-owned land. But then I saw the survey flags. Bright orange, freshly placed, and clearly, boldly, confidently on my side of the property line. My heart started pounding. Not in fear, in disbelief, rage, confusion. All at once, a storm brewed in my chest. I marched up to the site manager, the sunburnt guy with sunglasses and a clipboard, and shouted over the noise, "Me, you're on private property." Site manager, barely looking up, "We're on HOA Development Phase 3, sir." Me, "No, you're on my property. This land is mine." He flipped through his binder like I was a customer complaining about fries being cold. Site manager, "Not according to the HOA's master plan." Master plan? Master plan? I snatched the papers out of his hands. He laughed and said, "Look, they've been planning this for years. If you had objections, you should have gone to the hearings." Hearings? What hearings? The HOA had annexed my land on their internal maps. They never filed with the county, never notified me, never bought it, never even talked to me. They just assumed I'd go along with the neighborhood improvements. And because they assumed, they'd built. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, from fury so deep it made my spine buzz. I went straight to their HOA office, a fancy name for a rented room in the community clubhouse. There sat the board, Greg and his 3 cronies. Greg was smirking the second I walked in. "Ah, I wondered when you'd show up," he said, like this was all part of some game. He slid a packet across the table, dozens of pages of legal jargon, none of it legitimate, fake claims, fake maps, fake authority. He said, "We're a growing community. Your unused land is essential for our long-term development plan. You can either cooperate and accept the compensation package, or you can let us proceed and not get paid at all." Compensation package. They offered me $5,000 for 42 acres with a reservoir. I pushed the packet back toward him, calm, controlled, terrifyingly calm. I said, "You've made a mistake." He smirked again. "No, you have by ignoring the HOA." I drove home. My mind was white noise, my vision tunneled. Rage and betrayal knotted inside me, tighter and hotter than anything I'd ever felt. They built homes on my land. They stole my property. They challenged me with fake documents. They laughed in my face. I parked beside the reservoir. The calm water reflected the sky like a mirror. And that is when the idea hit me. Not revenge, not violence, not destruction. Just justice. When I woke up the next morning, I half hoped everything had been a stress-induced nightmare. But then I heard it. The rumbling of cement trucks, the beep, beep, beep of heavy machinery backing up, the rhythmic clack of nail guns firing like distant artillery. No, it was real. And it was getting worse. I grabbed my coffee and walked down to the tree line that overlooked the construction site. From that hill, I could see just how far they'd gone overnight. What had been empty dirt pads yesterday were now skeletons of homes, framed, sheathed, and swarming with workers like ants on a sugar pile. 35 houses, all on land that legally belonged to me. But the worst part? They had no clue they were about to learn a very expensive lesson in land rights and common sense. Around noon that day, a white SUV with the HOA logo on the side pulled up to my house. Out stepped Greg, the HOA president, with 2 board members behind him, all wearing matching polos, all sunglasses, all arrogance. I walked out to meet them on my porch. Greg: "Good afternoon. We need to discuss your non-compliance." Me: "You mean you're trespassing." He smirked like I was a child who didn't understand adult words. "You're not taking this seriously. Those homes are scheduled to sell in the fall. We need you to sign the land transfer." He handed me a clipboard, like he expected me to obediently scribble my signature on the dotted line. I looked down at the paper. Fake parcel maps, fake annexation notes, fake HOA authority extending onto my acreage. Me: "You know this isn't legal." Greg: "It will be once everything is finalized." Me: "Not how property law works." Greg: "Our attorney disagrees." I had to laugh. Not because it was funny, because the audacity was so outrageous it was comical. I handed the clipboard back. Me: "Get off my property." Greg stepped forward, invading my space with that smug, overpowering confidence only a man who's never been punched in the mouth can carry. Greg: "You have 2 choices. Take the money or lose everything." I studied him. Then I looked past him, toward the construction site, the homes, the workers, the illegally placed foundations. He thought he had me cornered. He had no idea the dam existed. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the tree line, a pickup truck pulled into my driveway. It wasn't one from the HOA this time. It was the site manager, the same guy whose clipboard I had practically snatched the day before. He looked nervous, shifting from foot to foot. Site manager: "Can we talk?" Me: "You're standing on my property. Talking is about the only polite option left." He removed his sunglasses, revealing tired eyes. This wasn't a man looking for confrontation. This was someone who realized he'd been dragged into a much bigger mess. Site manager: "Listen, between you and me, the HOA board said they had all the permits. They said the land was theirs. My crew is just doing what we were contracted to do." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for the guy. Almost. Me: "You're building on land that's not legally owned by the HOA." He exhaled sharply. "That's what I was afraid of." Me: "You should shut it down before you get dragged into a lawsuit." Site manager: "I can't. The HOA is threatening to sue us if we stop. They've already paid deposits. They're desperate." Desperate. That stuck with me. People don't lie this big unless they're cornered. People don't build 35 homes on stolen land unless their entire development timeline is collapsing. I nodded toward the dam through the trees. "You see that water over there?" He glanced. "Yeah." "That reservoir sits on a natural floodplain. You're building on land that is designed to flood." He swallowed hard. You wouldn't... I don't have to do anything illegal. All I have to do is use my own property the way it was intended." He stepped back, eyes wide. "I need to make a phone call." He hurried to his truck and peeled out of my driveway. But I knew what would happen next. He'd call the HOA. The HOA would panic. The panic would turn into threats, and the threats would turn into desperation. And desperate people do stupid things. That evening, I found a bright orange notice taped to my front door. "Cease and desist, unauthorized water reservoir." I laughed so hard I actually choked. They were trying to tell me that I wasn't allowed to maintain the reservoir I legally owned because it posed a risk to the developing community. In other words, they realized the dam was their Achilles heel. Their worst nightmare wasn't me suing them. Their worst nightmare was that the reservoir could at any time release water downhill across the construction site, washing away their illegal foundations. It's funny how reality works. That night, I walked down to the reservoir. The moonlight danced on the surface. Crickets hummed. The air smelled of wet earth and old memories. I approached the dam, resting my hand on the cold metal of the release wheel. I didn't turn it yet. I just held it. And in that quiet moment, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not revenge, not triumph. I felt sadness. Sadness for the workers who would lose hours of labor. Sadness for the people who had already put down deposits on homes built illegally. Sadness that this entire mess could have been avoided if a handful of power-hungry HOA board members simply treated people like humans. But sadness wasn't going to fix anything. Justice would. And justice was coming with the sunrise.
The morning of the flood didn't start with thunder, or rage, or even adrenaline. It started with quiet. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the world is holding its breath. I walked down to the reservoir as the first hints of sunrise painted the water a deep blood orange color. The air was cool, almost cold. My boots crunched through wet grass as dew soaked my pant legs. In the distance, I could hear the hum of generators and the metallic clang of workers starting their morning shift on the illegal construction site. But over all of that, the reservoir was calm. Too calm. I stood at the edge of the dam and took a deep breath. This was the moment. Not out of revenge, not out of spite, out of necessity. Because when the law fails, when negotiations fail, when basic respect fails, sometimes reality has to do the talking. When my hand touched the cold steel of the release valve, a strange stillness washed over me. It wasn't anger, more like acceptance. This was never what I wanted, none of it. I've been perfectly content living a quiet life on my land, minding my business. But they didn't want quiet. They wanted control, and they thought they could seize it from me. I gripped the wheel, braced my feet, and slowly turned. At first, nothing happened. Then, a deep, hollow groan echoed through the dam, metal grinding against metal, the reservoir shifting in its ancient, long-settled place. And then a rumble, a surge, a rush of water pushed against the release pipes with a force that made the ground tremble. The spillway opened. A foamy torrent exploded out, crashing down the rocky downhill path. The sound was thunderous, like a freight train barreling through the forest. I turned the wheel another half rotation. The water roared louder, faster, stronger. Down below, the construction site lay exactly where the water was naturally meant to go, because my grandfather, smart man that he was, never built anything on that floodplain. It was designed to overflow, to redirect water during storms, to protect the land around it. The HOA, they built foundations on it, foundations that were now directly in the path of an unstoppable force. From the top of the dam, I could see movement, workers pointing, shouting, running. One crew member sprinted toward the half-finished house as water surged around the concrete supports. Others scrambled to move equipment uphill, yelling at each other over the roaring flood. The site manager, the same one who'd visited me the day before, jumped into his truck and sped toward higher ground. He understood exactly what was happening. But the HOA board members, they were clueless. It didn't take long for them to arrive. I saw their white SUV fishtailing down the gravel access road as they raced toward the chaos. They jumped out, shouting orders no one listened to. Greg stormed up the hill, pointing and waving his arms like he thought he could command water to stop flowing. He looked like a man trying to hold back a hurricane with a clipboard. Greg marched toward me with fury, radiating off him like heat from asphalt. Greg said, "What have you done?" I said, "Used my reservoir exactly as it's designed to function." He jabbed a finger toward the flood. "You're destroying our development." I said, "You're building on my land." He said, "You can't do this. You're liable for damages." I laughed, a short, sharp bark that echoed off the dam. "Sue me with what money? For water flowing on land I legally own? Water following a natural floodplain? Greg, you might want to check your maps. The real ones. The ones filed with the county." His face changed. Not anger, not shock, but fear. Real, cold, dawning fear. Because he finally understood that he wasn't fighting me. He was fighting the truth. Behind him, one of the half-built houses collapsed. The wooden frame twisted, snapped, and toppled sideways as the ground beneath it eroded. Workers shouted. Someone yelled for everyone to get to higher ground. Greg spun around, watching in horror as tens of thousands of dollars in construction washed away in seconds. Greg said, "Turn it off! Turn it off!" I said, "You stop trespassing on my land and I'll consider it." Greg said, "You're insane!" I said, "No, I'm patient, very patient. You pushed me to this." Two other board members ran up the hill, soaked from the knees down. Their perfect pressed polo shirts were drenched. Mud streaked across their shoes. Board member 1 said, "We need to call the sheriff." Board member 2 said, "This is vandalism." I said, "It's my water, my dam, my land." Board member 1 said, "We'll sue you for everything." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Sue me with what money? The development was supposed to pay for your HOA's debts, wasn't it?" They froze. I knew, they knew I knew. The site manager had all but confirmed it. Their entire development project was a desperate attempt to pull the HOA out of financial collapse. They were drowning before the flood even started. Now, they were sinking fast. The water surged harder now, muddy, violent, consuming everything in its path. One by one, the illegal foundations crumbled. Lumber floated away like driftwood. A cement mixer toppled, half submerged as water swallowed its wheels. Electrical boxes sparked, hissed, and died. The construction site transformed into a churning river, a river reclaiming what should never have been disturbed. I turned the wheel another notch, not out of spite, but to reinforce what nature demanded. The HOA members shouted, begged, threatened, but I stood my ground, hands steady on the steel, watching their empire of arrogance wash away. Because justice doesn't always come in a courtroom. Sometimes it comes in the form of water, cold, unstoppable, and absolutely fair.
The flood didn't last long. It didn't need to. The reservoir wasn't enormous, just steady, powerful, and perfectly aligned with the natural slope of the land. The water did exactly what nature had always intended, flowed downhill, spread across the floodplain, soaked into the earth, then drained onward. But in the 45 minutes the release gate was open, the damage was done. 35 illegal home sites were now nothing but twisted wood, ruined foundations, muddy trenches, and shattered hopes. And the HOA? They finally stopped shouting long enough to panic. By the time I closed the release valve and walked back to the house, I could already hear sirens. Sheriff's SUV, county truck, 2 cruisers. They came roaring up the gravel drive as if I'd burned the neighborhood down. I waited on the porch, calm as ever. The sheriff, a broad-shouldered man named Daniels, stepped out first. He'd known my family for decades. I'd fished with his father. His boots crunched in the gravel as he approached, jaw tight. Sheriff Daniels. Morning. Me. Morning. He nodded toward the soaked mess below. Sheriff Daniels. Got a call about a flood. Yep. Caused by you? My reservoir, my property, my legal right. He exhaled slowly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Behind him, Greg and the HOA board erupted in a chorus of furious shouting. Arrest him! He destroyed our homes! This is tens of thousands in damage! He's liable! Another. He sabotaged our development! Daniels raised a hand without looking at them. They silenced instantly. He turned back to me. Mind telling me what happened? I shrugged. Routine maintenance. The spillway needed clearing. Standard annual release. It's written into the original land use documents from 1966. Sheriff Daniels. And the houses. Not mine, not permitted, not legal. Daniels glanced back at the HOA, then down at the muddy wreckage. He'd been around long enough to smell a scam long before anyone spelled it out. The sheriff had barely finished talking when a second truck pulled up, white with the county seal on the side. The door opened and out stepped county land surveyor and inspector Maria DeSoto, clipboard in hand, laser-focused eyes. If Daniels suspected something was off, Maria knew it. She strode right past the HOA board without a single glance and spread her maps across the hood of her truck. She pointed to the parcels. Whose idea was it to build on this floodplain? The HOA collectively pointed at me. Greg. It was his land, but he wasn't using it properly. The development was for community benefit. Maria slowly lifted her head, looked at him. Blink. Blink. Then she tapped the map aggressively. This isn't your land. Greg, we annexed it for Phase 3 of the development. Maria's eyebrows shot up so high they practically left her forehead. Annexed? Where's the county filing? Greg hesitated. A beat. Another beat. The board members looked at each other, silently praying someone had the paperwork. No one did. Maria, you didn't file. It wasn't a question. It was a sentence. Her voice rang with a tone halfway between disbelief and outrage. You built 35 structures on land you don't own, land zoned as agricultural floodplain without county approval. The HOA board collectively shrank. Greg opened his mouth, but Maria shut him down with a raised finger. You've committed at least 4 county violations, 2 zoning violations, and likely several counts of fraudulent development. The sheriff's eyes widened slightly, as if to say, well, looks like I know who'll be leaving in cuffs today. The board stammered, pointed fingers at each other, blamed the contractors, blamed outdated maps, blamed clerical misunderstandings, but Maria wasn't having any of it. She walked the site, boots splashing through mud, documenting everything. She took photos of the washed-out foundations, measured flood markers, compared GPS coordinates to official county maps. After 30 minutes, she returned, expression stone cold. Sheriff, this entire development is a fraud. Greg looked like he'd been punched in the gut. You can't be serious. Maria, dead serious. She turned to me. Your reservoir release was legal and documented and necessary. To the HOA, you built on his floodplain. This damage is on you. The silence from the HOA was beautiful. Daniels finally stepped forward. Greg Sanders? Greg swallowed. Greg Sanders, you're under investigation for development fraud, illegal land annexation, falsification of county documents, and trespassing. Greg sputtered like a broken sprinkler. You can't blame me for this. The board agreed. The developer agreed. Daniels motioned to his deputies. We'll sort that out at the station. They didn't cuff him, not yet, but they escorted him away from the site and into a cruiser. The board followed, frantic, shouting, trying to argue with the sheriff, with Maria, with anyone who would listen. But no one listened, because the truth was too loud. When the HOA finally cleared out, when the last siren faded into the distance, I walked back through the mud. The site was ruined, but not by me, by their greed. And in that muddy silence, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not joy, not victory, just relief. Because the land was mine again, the way it always should have been. I paused at the edge of the floodplain, looked back at the dam and whispered, Granddad, I hope you're proud. The land had defended itself. Nature had answered. And the HOA? Well, they weren't done paying yet. The legal storm was still coming, and I was ready.
Time has a funny way of revealing truth. What feels like chaos in the moment often becomes clarity in the rearview mirror. And in the weeks after the great HOA flood, clarity arrived in the form of thick legal envelopes, county hearings, and a whole lot of people realizing they had backed the wrong horse. This wasn't over when the water stopped flowing. No, this was just the beginning of the consequences. A week after the incident, I heard the familiar crunch of tires on gravel. A courier handed me a stack of papers nearly an inch thick, an HOA lawsuit, filed against me for environmental sabotage, destruction of property, intentional infliction of financial loss, negligent water management. It was laughable, like someone suing the rain for being wet. I called my attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Karen who'd handled my grandfather's estate years back. She flipped through the papers, snorted, and said, Karen, this is garbage. They won't survive the first hearing. And she was right, because on page 3 of their complaint, they accidentally attached their own development plan, the one showing my land drawn in as part of their subdivision. Fake parcel numbers, fake annexation lines, fake approval stamps. It was like they handed the judge a confession wrapped with a bow. At the county zoning meeting, the room was packed. Contractors, neighbors, local reporters, angry people who had put deposits down on homes that would now never exist. The HOA board members sat in the front row, pale and sweating, eyes glued to their papers like schoolchildren hoping the teacher wouldn't call on them. Surveyor Maria stood up first. She laid out the real county maps, the real parcel lines, the real floodplain boundaries. Then she said the words that sealed the HOA's fate. Maria. This development was 100% illegal. They built on land they never owned, they never filed permits, they falsified annexation maps, and they constructed on an active floodplain, clearly labeled in the county registry. Gasps filled the room. One contractor muttered, I frickin' knew something was off. Another homeowner shouted, we trusted you, at the HOA board. Then it was my turn. I walked up, placed my grandfather's original 1966 survey on the table, crisp, yellowed paper, handwritten notes, and a stamped seal from a different era. Me. The reservoir has been here for 60 years. The spillway releases annually. The HOA knew this. They were warned. They ignored it. I paused. The flood didn't destroy their homes. Their lies did. The room went silent, except for the sound of the judge's pen scribbling furiously across her notepad. When she finally lifted her head, her face was stern, almost disappointed, like a parent addressing unruly children. Judge, this HOA acted with reckless disregard for property law, zoning regulations, and public safety. Their claims against the landowner are dismissed with prejudice. The HOA is hereby fined for illegal development and will be held financially responsible for all damages caused. Gasps again. Greg visibly wilted. But the judge wasn't done. Judge. Furthermore, due to evidence of fraud, the board will be referred to the district attorney for criminal review. I swear I heard someone whisper, "Oh, damn." The fallout was immediate and brutal. The HOA president, Greg, was charged with development fraud, document falsification, and misuse of community funds. 2 board members resigned before they could be formally questioned. The developers sued the HOA, claiming they'd been misled. Residents sued the HOA for mismanagement and fraud. The county placed a lien on the HOA for environmental cleanup and reconstruction of the floodplain. The HOA that once strutted around issuing fines for grass height and mailbox color? Gone, bankrupt, dismantled, legally crushed under the weight of their own arrogance. And me? I finally got peace back. For the first time in months, I walked the floodplain with no construction noise, no machines, no unwelcome strangers. Just wind and wild grasses beginning to grow again. I cleaned the spillway, trimmed the brush around the dam, restored the property to what it had been before the HOA decided to turn it into their empire. One day, the site manager, the only person in this whole mess who had shown me any respect, came by. He stood at the edge of the muddy field, hands in his pockets. Site manager. "I'm sorry this happened. For what it's worth, I warned them." Me. "I know you did." He nodded once. Site manager. "If you ever need work done on your land, give me a call. A real job this time." And with that, he left. The land was quiet again, and it felt right. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that land doesn't lie. People do. Paperwork does. HOAs definitely do. But the land? It remembers its purpose, and if you respect it, it'll fight for you. The HOA thought they could bully, steal, and manipulate their way into building their dream community. Instead, they drowned in their own greed. So if you ever find yourself dealing with an HOA that thinks it's above the law, remember my story, and remember this reservoir. Because sometimes the best way to stop a flood of arrogance is with a real one.